Hi, this is Daniel Alpine, animation historian, and welcome to another episode of Animation Memory Lane. The concept of competition is interesting, but also very troubled, and the animation industry is no different, especially in the 1930s when every studio had tried but still failed to match the success of Walt Disney. But the one that was closest to that was the Fleischer Studios. The studio was founded in 1929 in New York City, and the founders were brothers Max and Dave Fleischer. Their first series was Out of the Inkwell, starring Coco the Clown, and after that, the studio found bigger success with their characters Betty Boop and later Popeye the Sailor. While Walt Disney and Max Fleischer never met until the 1950s, the two were fierce rivals in the cartoon business. In 1934, Walt Disney announced that he was to embark on what seemed to be the impossible at that time, which was to produce a full length cartoon feature. And the Fleischer Studios thought perhaps they can do that as well. But their distributor at that time, Paramount Pictures, rejected it because it was believed that the concept was too much of a risk, especially since Paramount recovered from bankruptcy. But when Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs proved to be a blockbuster hit, Paramount changed their minds and ordered the Fleischers to produce their own animated feature and to have it prepared for a Christmas time 1939 release. For the subject material, Max decided to adapt one of his favorite books, Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels. Mark Hausler, animation historian and freelance animator, thinks that the initial idea was to cover the entire book. If anyone's ever read it, you'll know that each chapter, protagonist Gulliver lands on different islands with each different oddities. But it was soon decided to focus on the first chapter, which was Gulliver's encounter with a tiny kingdom. The production of this film was a little troubled because, in contrast to Snow White, which was in production for 3 years, the Fleischers had 18 months to finish this film. That's that's very short. And this was when the studio packed up and moved from New York City to Florida after a studio strike in 1937. The story for the feature was written in New York, but actual production was done in Florida. In order to meet the schedule, the entire crew had to work overtime, but a few schedules, that is, were compromised, and Paramount was this close to canceling the film. But it was finished and was released to theaters, well, today in 1939, and it did prove to be a box office success. Unfortunately, the film went a little over budget, and the Fleischers were in debt to Paramount for $350,000. That was the signal of the beginning of the end of Fleischer Studios. While the film was mostly well received, it still has not achieved the status of a classic masterpiece as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Having watched it recently, I can understand the reasons. That, in contrast to Snow White, which was an excellent balance of comedy, drama, music, all done in the art of animation, the Fleischer's Gulliver's Travels didn't really have any of that. While the animation was as good as Snow White, still the story and the songs weren't weren't really involving, and the characters were, well, let's face it, bland clones of the characters in Snow White. but the movie isn't bad. You can enjoy it, and I would suggest watching it for the historical context and to fans of classic animation. And I think that we can all consider it better than the 2010 live action version that Jack Black starred in that was more different than the book. The Fleischers' attempt at another feature, which was Mr. Bug Goes to Town, was very much better than this one. But that's another story. Thank you. Merry Christmas.